Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Salim. I'm the president of the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. Welcome to this pre-briefing, I suppose, relating to the upcoming parliamentary elections in Lebanon this Sunday. We already had expat voting around the world last weekend. We will hear about the expat voting, and then we will look to the upcoming elections this coming Sunday. These are elections that are, like most elections, very, very significant. They come 2 years after the uprising that started in 2019, or 2.5 years. They come in the midst of a devastating economic collapse in Lebanon, a time of great tension. It comes 1.5 years after the port blast of August 2020. So there's certainly a lot going on in Lebanon, a lot of political contention. We have with us a number of friends and colleagues and experts to help us unpack and walk through these issues. Let me introduce them quickly before engaging them in conversation. We have with us from Beirut, Rony Al Assaad. Rony is the Secretary General of the Lebanese Association for Democratic Elections, an NGO that was set up more than 25 years ago in Lebanon to monitor elections, to look at election laws, a group that I think both Randa and I were involved in back in the day. So Rony, it's great to have you with us. With us also, who happens also to be in Beirut right now, is our friend Philippe Nasif. Philippe is the program director for the Middle East and North Africa at the National Democratic Institute, which is based here in Washington, D.C. It's an American NGO that promotes democracy around the world, and he is very much following and working and engaged in the Lebanese elections, among many others. Finally, as well, my good friend and colleague, Dr. Randa Sneem. Randa is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and the director of the Institute's Conflict Resolution and Track 2 Dialogues program. Like myself, she is Lebanese American and follows Lebanese issues very closely and is there very frequently. And I think you're going there again soon, if I'm not mistaken, Randa. Let's get right into it, and maybe start first with the what happened over this past weekend, the expat voting, and maybe let me turn to you, Rony. Give me your sort of first reflections on how you saw the expat voting unfold, whether in terms both of process, did it work, registration, voting, and all of that. Where are the boxes now? Are they secure? And also your reflections on turnout. What did it look like sort of politically for you? Rony, let me start with you.
Thank you, Dr. Paul, and thank you for the invitation. If I may share just one sheet, if you can see it.
Yes, we can. Thank you, Rony. Yes.
Great. Yeah, so very, very briefly, as LADE, we were observing elections. We had observers in the ministry itself and also in around 29 countries around the world, either on Friday or Sunday. In general, our first evaluation as LADE, we can say that we have a significant turnout comparing to 2018. And also, we have noticed a good organization from the side of Ministry of Foreign Affairs comparing to 2018 as well. And regarding the violations, we have seen and observed the regular expected violations that, in our opinion, were expected and do not really constitute any like severe or deep or major violations or threat to the integrity of the election process in general. But one concern that we are really keen to not to see on Sunday is that the head of polling stations, they were not able, or they were not trained very well. Some of them were really didn't know about a lot about the electoral law itself. And we have a concern that on Sunday, all head of polling stations did not get any training. I will talk about this in the challenges maybe on Sunday, but this is one of our main observation. So if I will right now try to depict each point of them. So significant turnout, yes, as average 60%, it is a good number, specifically that the number of registrants and people who showed up on Friday and Sunday is way bigger than 2018. It's almost 3 times the number of 2018, which is really a good number. And does this will affect some of the results in some of the districts? We have to wait and see. Definitely, it will help a lot in increasing or supporting some of the political parties and some of the new, let's say, political movements, okay? The good organization, yeah, I mean, the ministry and specifically the diplomats in the ministry, they were really keen to not make any fault or any mistake. It's like they were under pressure that we need really to succeed in this. Although the money is not yet offered to them, they have covered all this operation, which is very huge logistical operation throughout the history of Lebanon. Okay, I mean, having elections in 58 countries, it's not easy. This is what we've seen, because every violation, every observation we had, either us as LADE or from the people itself, it was directly channeled to the ministry, to the diplomats in the ministry, and they were on the phone 24 hours trying to correct any mistake and resolve any problem. And as you all know, the boxes were open on, definitely, for example, for Sunday elections, they were open very early on Saturday night from 11 p.m. in Beirut time until Monday 8 a.m. Beirut time. So this was a huge time period of operation, and the ministry did very well. And here I have to say, to open a brackets about the registration, the prior registration, a lot of people were really accusing the ministry, but to us, it's not the problem of the ministry or the mistake of the ministry that they didn't mention previously that they will be based on the residence code before the registration. That's why because they thought, especially the political parties, they thought that it will be the same as 2018. So people really didn't care about mentioning the right exact let's say PO box. So that's why when the ministry tried to distribute the polling centers, when we face a little bit of problem, especially that some of political parties took the responsibility of this and tried to register many Lebanese, putting one or the same PO box, and that here when the problem happened. So this is the only problem that we have faced in terms of registration. Expected violations, I've mentioned this, that we did observe violations, but it's more about breaching the secrecy of voting. It's about seeing a lot of gathering for political parties, which is really breaching the silence period. It's the expected and normal political behavior of Lebanese people and their political parties, which is, to us, it's a violation to the law. And the last point, I'm not sure there's a need to expand on this, but really, the Ministry of Interior didn't train the head of polling stations. All they have done, they have sent a video to their WhatsApp numbers explaining the procedures, and that's it. So we are expecting on Sunday to see a lot of let's say mistakes, a lot of maybe delay in organizing the operation, because the head of polling station, they have to stop a lot. They have to contact again the Ministry of Interior to know what they need to do, because they were not really very well trained.
Thank you, Rony.
I can stop here, Dr. Paul, if you have any questions, or I'm ready.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I mean, it's reassuring and heartening to know that from your perspective, the ministry did a decent job. It is obviously an enormous challenge. It's the second time this has been attempted. It's heartening to know that your observers found it more or less, organized, and to think that, not to give overdue credit, but that this is happening at a time when the government is bankrupt and the state has no resources, that it was done better than 2018 is at least, looking at the glass half full, as they say. It would be great if you could share a few more pictures, maybe later on. Even seeing this picture is very enlightening. I'd heard that there was a center in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs where you could see all the polling stations around the world. That's impressive. I also want to congratulate you and LADE for being so engaged. That was the purpose of LADE when it was established those many years ago. It's so great to see it active, not only in Lebanon now, but as you say, all over the world. So thank you, LADE, for the work you're doing. Let me ask a very critical question. Where are the boxes now? Are there around-the-clock observers? We heard that they were going to the basement of the Banque du Liban, the central bank. Is that true? Have you had eyeballs on them? All of that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, based on the law itself, number 44, all the boxes have to come to the central bank, and they have to be, let's say, safe there until 15 May, because these boxes, they have to move again with a security escort to the higher registration committee in Beirut, okay, in the Justice Palace in Beirut, where judges, the member of the committee, they have to count the votes, because the counting of the vote didn't happen outside. All what happened is just to write a, let's say, a minutes or a report about the number of ballot box of the ballots, and that's it. Here in Beirut, the judges, the member, the committee will count the votes, and then they will put the number of votes for each list and each candidate, and then they have to send the result to the all 15 districts in Lebanon in order to enter the results on the software, and then they have to the committee there in the districts, they have to hand the results to the Ministry of Interior in order to announce it publicly.
So Rony, my question is, those boxes which we presume are at the central bank, is anybody there with them? Is anybody observing that?
No, the moment the boxes went out from the polling stations abroad, no one was in the DHL, and also DHL didn't work in Syria, Russia, and who else? And Venezuela, and another country as well, in Iran. So here, the ambassadors itself come with the boxes on to Lebanon. So the moment the boxes get out from the polling stations, no one was there, and even on the Beirut airport, they have handed these boxes to the a representative of Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They have signed that they have received these boxes, and then they went all together with the security escort to central bank when they have deposited these boxes there, and that's it. We don't have observers. We don't have as LADE or even as supervisor committee or even any I don't know, any political parties. So that's the situation.
Thank you, Rony. I mean, I guess people who have deposits in the central bank have had not a lot of confidence in what happens there, but That's a very interesting report, Rony. A lot to be encouraged about, a lot of things maybe to continue to be concerned about. But thank you for what you're doing, Rony, and for all the LADE team. Thank you very much. Renda, let me turn to you. You're an expat voter, among many other things. How does, first of all, the process, the experience feel like to you and people you've talked to? And then how do you read, let's say, the politics of this expat vote? Of course, it's very varied between North America, Australia, Africa, Europe. Is it beginning, do you think it begins to make a difference in Lebanese politics, given that we've had 3 times the number of voters than even 2018? Over to you, Renda.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for the invitation. And Rony, thank you again. I join Paul in thanking you and thanking LADE for all the work that you guys are doing. It's really impressive, and we are all thankful for that. Expats, as well as I'm pretty sure people inside Lebanon. I think, I mean, it's heartening that we have reached 60% of registered voters, expat registered voters showing up, and some of them have had to drive hours, to the polling station. I don't think people understand, realize that in countries like Australia, like the United States, like, for example, me, somebody who's in Ohio right now has to travel 3.5 hours to Detroit to cast their vote at the embassy, at the consulate there, and then drive back on the same day. So that's about what, 6.5 hours of drive. So the fact that you had so many, that high percentage shows the level of enthusiasm. Now, will this be a harbinger of the turnout in Lebanon? Again, I mean, Philippe and Rony are already in Lebanon. I rely on conversations with the relatives, with friends who are in Lebanon, especially now, asking them, are you going to vote, who they are going to vote, just to get a sense of the mood. My sense is that level of enthusiasm that we saw among the expatriate voter is not right now present in Lebanon. And I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that things will change between now and Sunday. I mean, it's an eternity in political terms, but so far I haven't seen that level of enthusiasm. I know a lot of people who are not going to vote. There is already the call by Saad Hariri, who is not contesting the election, for his supporters not to vote, to boycott the vote. There is, I think, now afoot some efforts by the Mufti of Lebanon, as well as other Sunni politicians like Senora and Mikati, this Friday during the Friday sermon, to encourage all the people, in the mosque, especially in the Sunni community, to go and vote on Sunday. But still, I'm hearing, according to some public opinion polls, about 30% of Sunni voters might boycott the vote and heed the call of Sheikh Saad Hariri, unless Sheikh Saad Hariri changes his mind about the boycott between now and Sunday, which so far is not to be the case. Also, the other thing about the expat vote, not only in terms of enthusiasm and voter turnout, is that also we cannot make the assumption that this expatriate vote is going to favor, the change or the opposition coalition. If you look at the pictures of the vote taking place in Berlin, it was very clear that, at least the pictures that we saw on Lebanese TV, that many of those voters were going to vote for Nabih Berri, who is anything but change candidate. And so the question that, is this going to favor opposition, civil society versus the traditional parties? I think we cannot make that kind of assumption here. However, building on what Rony said in terms, can the higher turnout favor, make a difference in the results? I think it all depends on the electoral district. So if you look at certain electoral districts like North 3, which has Batroun, Zgharta, Koura, and Bshirri, if you look at the percentage or the proportion of non-resident registered voters out of the total of voters, I think it's pretty high. So in that respect, if you have a higher voter turnout, that can make a difference. Depending on where it goes, it can make a difference in the results, because we are talking about, few hundreds of votes that can make a difference. Whereas if you look at other electoral districts where the proportion of registered voters non-resident registered voter to the total number of registered voter is low, I think that the likelihood of the expatriate vote, no matter how high it is, making a difference in the results in that electoral districts becomes lower. So that's one point in terms of the relationship between the expatriate and the in-country and the influence that expatriate voter. However, I think if we see more cases of the expatriate vote, changing the results, I think that's going to create a dynamic going forward. So you are going to see more of the traditional leaders as well as civil societies paying more attention and investing more time and resources in the future in lobbying for that expat vote, which especially among the traditional leaders has not been the case until now. They have either taken it for granted or they have not factored it in their political strategies, in their political machine. And I think going forward, this might change. Again, the higher enthusiasm level, but also whether it's going to impact the results or not. I will just build on what Rony said in terms of the transparency of the process by which the expat vote is going to be carried into Lebanon, stored and counted. I think that there is a lot of skepticism about that. And depending on who's going to win, who's going to lose, I think that's going to come up. This issue will be brought in after the tabulation of the results by, let's put it by the losers. So they will raise this as an issue in terms of impacting the results, basically questioning the transparency and the validity of that process and raising suspicions about vote tampering during the process of transporting the ballots, then storing them, then tabulating them. Let me just, before, I think we are going to have time to discuss about the results going forward. I think the Sunni boycott is going to be very interesting. Going into the elections, it was very clear this was the community which has the most disarray among its leaders, if we can put it this way, especially after Saad Hariri decided to exit the political scene and then eventually called for a boycott. So it's going to be interesting to see how the boycott will affect the results. It's assumed that the boycott will benefit Hezbollah and their allies, especially among the Sunnis in the Sunni community. So it's a dynamic to watch. But also it's interesting in terms of what the boycott, if it really happens, what does it mean for the leadership of the Sunni community going forward? Because right now, these elections, as far as the Sunni community leadership is concerned, is really a contest among 3 or 4 men about who's going to be the next leader, in that community. So you have always Saad Hariri there. So if the boycott were successful, Saad Hariri can say, you see, I'm still the leader. Then you have Fouad Senoura, who is not running, but who is fielding lists, contesting the elections. And then you have Mikati, the current prime minister, also is not running, like Senoura, but also Mikati, who is trying to basically, carve out some space within within the Future Movement constituency and try to, poach some of those disenchanted Sunni voters from the Future Movement. He's, for example, fielding a list or supporting a list in Akkar, and that's an area where he's trying to see if he can make a inroad. And then you have Fouad Makhzoumi, who is, a billionaire, who is a member of the parliament running, fielding few candidates. And then you have Baha Hariri, who is not running and, supporting, few lists also around the country. So I think depending on how the results will eventually be finalized, I think it's going to be very telling in terms of who of these names is going to emerge as the Sunni leader going forward. I'll stop at this point.
Thank you very much, Randa. That gives us a tremendous amount of context. Philippe, let me turn to you. But let's still be talking about this expat voting process, and then we'll turn to the upcoming elections on in country on Sunday. Philippe, my question to you, you're with the National Democratic Institute. They follow elections all over the world. We're not the only country that does expat voting. Many countries do not. How did this expat voting process look to you? Did the international community, was it helpful? Was it engaged, helping the ministry or embassies get this complicated thing done? Are we doing it the right way? Are there other models to do it? And then sort of a quick factual question, maybe you have the quick answer, maybe Rony has it. What is 130,000 expats voted? What is the what was the actual turnout? How many people voted in 2018 generally? I mean, are we talking 2 million, 1.5 million? So that we can get a sense, how big is 130,000 overall as a number from actual people who turned out in 2018? So Philippe, over to you.
Sure, thank you, Paul, and thank you to all the other panelists and to everybody that's tuning in. I think that last question I'll kick off to Rony after I answer the other questions, because he may have a better sense of that. Look, I mean, I think looking at the expat voting and what's took place so far, and actually just the elections being held on time, I think the credit to that largely goes to the international community heaping enormous pressure on Lebanon to stick to the timeline of holding elections when they were supposed to be held, or when they are supposed to be held, which is on the 15th, a couple of days from now. And I think that's very important for a number of reasons. I think one, the international community is watching the situation in Lebanon. They have been watching the country unravel economically, socially, politically for several years. It's been a slow motion disaster. I'm here on the ground right now as part of an observation mission, an unofficial one, meaning there's no sort of government entity involved in us observing the elections. It's NDI led with a whole bunch of our partners that do work here on the ground year round on many of the programs that we've been hearing about today. And so this observation mission will fan out across the country and sort of observe how the elections are being conducted on election day. But we've heard time and time again from people here so far in the few days that I've been here on the ground that there's a lot of enthusiasm among the diaspora community to cast their vote, because many of these people have left recently. They were forced to leave to seek better economic opportunities, and they've joined their brothers and sisters who've left in previous successive generations and convinced them to participate in the election and cast votes. And that convincing part is successful in some cases and unsuccessful in others. You've got many who just don't want to bother and don't think anything is going to change for the better. And you have a lot that feel like this is sort of a last stand, so to speak, for the country because of the economic collapse. And I think that piece right there, that last stand piece, is very interesting. And I want to dig into that just a little bit more because you've got, oftentimes we talk about voting and voter enthusiasm. Today, I want to talk a little bit about voter anger. And that is very unpredictable. When people are really, really angry, and we've seen this in elections all over the world, the vote results can go in multiple directions at once. You can get a higher than expected turnout for establishment parties and for opposition parties and sort of these revolutionary groups, so to speak, that are on some lists in Lebanon, not very well organized, but they do have some sort of a presence in some key areas of the country. And so that is really the interesting aspect to this. I walked by an ATM earlier today where there was a long line of people waiting, and they were all sharing their strategies and how they've been able to pull out money this week from the ATMs. And one of the young men started shouting, saying, "I can't wait to vote." And then everything else was expletives after that. And so I think that is sort of the atmosphere that I have found to sort of hit me in the face the minute I started walking around Beirut. And it's been 2.5 years since I've been here on the ground. It is a different country. It is an entirely different country, an entirely different mood. And it's sad, but there's definitely a palpable anger that's in the air. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that translates in terms of the voting. So you have this expat vote, and you have a lot of these folks that have family here, obviously, and talk to them and know the hardship that they're facing. And again, that's another unpredictable aspect as to how they have voted. Are they voting for the familiar parties that are not in the majority right now? Are they going to do something a little bit different? And did they even have that option to do something different? Because that was also something that was a little bit difficult, where they're only given certain options because they're expats. So overall, I think the work is still to be done here in terms of, from our perspective, observing actually what happens on election day. We did not fan out at all of the consulates and sort of watch the process take place, around the world and around the United States. But we are here on the ground, and we're looking forward to seeing how things sort of shake out in the coming days.
Thank you, Philippe. Do you have any thoughts, sort of the first question I was asking, about how other countries do expat voting? Any technical advice, lessons learned? Are we doing it, in general, doing it the right way? Are there other dramatically different ways to do it?
Well, I think all I can say is that, there's usually a cleaner process when it comes to getting the ballot boxes from point A to point B to point C. And here it's a little bit opaque, as you've heard. And I've seen some of the questions here as to why aren't there escorts with these ballot boxes every step of the way? There are some countries that conduct elections like that, and there are others that do not conduct elections like that. I think the part that sort of concerns everybody here is the backdrop to which these elections are taking place. And I'll go back to that again, because you've got incessant power cuts, you have infrastructure issues, you have really high costs of gasoline. They're not allowing people to be on motorcycles on election day, which I guess is a way to sort of curb protests. And so that is a transportation method people have increasingly started to use. So there's a lot of anxiety in terms of the accessibility of the elections period, and that's sort of spilling over into how the process was conducted overseas. But from our perspective, I think the diaspora community is massive, and I think that is a huge undertaking already. I really look forward to seeing improvements on how they go about doing this in future elections, where it's a little bit more clear to people exactly how this works. But I think for now, given what they have, the abilities they have in conducting the elections, it seems to have been okay.
Thanks very much, Philippe. To the audience, if you're joining us by Zoom, and if you have questions, please post them on the Q&A feature on Zoom. I will keep an eye on that and try to forward your questions to our panelists. If you're following on YouTube or sort of streaming online, please send an email with your question or comment to events@mei.edu, events@mei.edu. Rony, let me turn to you. First, a couple of sort of specific questions, and then we'll look at the upcoming Sunday. The specific questions, one is the one I posed. How big is 130,000 from the general usual turnout? How many people usually turn out to vote inside the country? How many turned out in 2018? Secondly, did LADE ask or demand to be present with these boxes, to escort them, to be there at the central bank, and was that refused? How worried are you about that? So those are two quick technical questions, and then just tell us how you're preparing for the Sunday election as LADE. What does it look like to you? What's the mood? What do you expect? Rony, over to you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Well, the turnout in 2018, even it was the first time the proportional representation was articulated in the law. The number didn't exceed the 49%.
But what is that number? How many people is that? Do you know?
How many people? No, I don't have the numbers. Let me check if I can have.
No worries. Maybe check it later, but it would be nice to know, is that 2 million? Is it 1.5 million? Just so that we have a sense, how much is 130,000? Is that a lot of people?
Yeah. Usually, the registered voters, in Lebanon, people who are allowed to vote, it's around 3,500,000, more or less. Okay, so if you can do the calculation now, like 50%, it's like maybe around 1,500,000, more or less. Okay.
So yeah, 130 is maybe 8%, not bad. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Rony. About observing these boxes which are hidden in the central bank.
Yeah, we are not there. I'm not sure this is, because it's a central bank, and to be able to enter the central bank, I think this is restricted only to the employees at the bank. I'm not sure we have asked to be there, because in 2018 we were not there. And yeah, maybe this need to be considered later on for the next elections. But do we have concern about the boxes in the central bank? I would say no, because more or less the boxes are protected, and the envelopes and the votes are all gathered, and they were sealed by a I'm not sure how to name the Shama al-Ahmar in English.
Red wax, sealed
Red
in
wax,
wax.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So and the envelopes itself, and even the ballot papers are signed by the head of polling stations, and and got the stamp of the Ministry of Interior. So I won't say that we have a really big concern that these boxes will be manipulated, kind of, or some would be able to enter to the central bank and try to change, the boxes. Our only concern is that when they move to the higher committee in Beirut to be counted and then to be sent to the districts, here we having concern that this escort will not reach the destinations very well. So it could be a concern. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Rony. Tell us a bit about your, I want to mention George Zahar online on the chat said that according to his data, 1.9 million people voted in 2018. So 130,000, I don't know what that would be, 6-7%, but not bad, let's say. Thank you for that, George. Rony, yes, Resranda, go ahead.
Can I ask Rony a question about the ballots? Is there a camera in the room where they are stored at the central bank that you can monitor?
No, we don't. There is no camera exposed on the boxes itself. No, we don't observe this. And yeah, because it's not mentioned in the law, actually. And I'm pretty sure that these kind of arrangements need to be first stipulated in the law. So this could be another recommendation maybe for the next elections.
Yep, clearly. Thank you, Rony. Could you give us a sense of how LADE is preparing for the elections on Sunday? What's the mood like? I know you're all over the country. We're only a few days away.
Yeah, very quickly, I have to say first that we are observing tomorrow's election as well on Thursday, because like there's the head, all the
military and not military, but
no, the head of the polling station, the whole committee. Tomorrow they have to vote. So we have around 14,950 people. They're going to vote tomorrow on all the Lebanese districts. So tomorrow we are also present in all the places where these people are going to vote, and we are going to be present in the whole countries on Sunday. We have a deployment policy that we do have a coordinator in each district along with the observers in each district. So we have kind of more or less around 900 observers. They have to be present in the most, or in a lot of, in 30% kind of on the polling stations. And in addition to that, we have people who observe, a mobile observer that move from polling station to another. And also, which is very important to us, that we have observers also at night observing the counting process, which is it's a very important process to us. And this is our policy on this. And definitely we are going to report each of the, let's say, big and important and major violations right away, and try to resolve it and contacting Ministry of Interior or any other related parties. So this is how LADE usually do the observation, and definitely we are going to issue a statement and a statement holding our evaluation of the long day the next day, and definitely all these reports that we have issued from the OCV and even from our long-term observers. We have launched so far 4 long-term observers since April. So all of these will constitute part of our final report that will be launched on kind of 1 month after the election. So maybe around June 15 as well.
Thank you, Rony. Randa, let me turn to you. Let's talk a bit about the potential politics of the elections. The mechanics hopefully will play out between Thursday and Sunday. We've already had the expat vote. These elections are happening in the midst of great upheaval inside the country, obviously. Also continued great division within the country between different political groups, but it also happens when the region itself is still very polarized between Iran on one side and other groups on the other. And it's also an election in 2022, which needs to be followed by designation of a new prime minister or a prime minister forming a government. Then we have the presidential elections. So there's a lot going on in 2022. What are the political stakes? How do you think it might play out? What are the 1 or 2 main scenarios that you see?
I think there are 4 main dynamics that we need to pay attention to as these results are tabulated. One is, what's the loss of the Free Patriotic Movement? How large is it? And that share of the Christian vote, who got it? You know, you have Ja'ja, the Lebanese forces, you have Kata'ib, Sami Jmail, and then you have number of independents who are running in these districts. And especially, I mean, it's expected basically FPM is going to lose big in Kisrwan, which has been one of the largest stronghold. And so who's going to get that vote? Because that again determines the leadership inside the Christian community. And then how Hezbollah is going to help the FPM make up for those losses in other districts where Hezbollah Shia voters and Hezbollah and Amal voters can basically help FPM on that district. So that's in those districts. So that's one dynamic I would be looking for, because that will determine who's going to be the candidates for the presidency. I think a big loss by the FPM is going to put to rest, in my opinion, which in my opinion is already put to rest, but it's going to put to rest the political aspiration of Gibran Basir. A major win by Lebanese forces is going to be, troublesome for Hezbollah going forward. And then also it's going to be troublesome when it comes to the formation of the cabinet. And we're going to see how is that going to be maneuvered. The second dynamic is the Sunni vote and who's going to win within that community and whether the boycott will take place, how it's going to benefit Hezbollah. That's the second dynamic. I already talked about that. The third dynamic is whether the Shia duopoly, Amal and Hezbollah, will be able to maintain their hold on the Shia community in terms of their candidates basically winning in all the districts where they are contesting, or are we going to see 1 to 2 independent Shia candidates basically breaking through that wall, or through that wall which has been in place until now, and if you look at Hezbollah and Amal's behavior recently, especially their supporters, the intimidation against candidates in the south who are running against them, the pressure, even threats that were put on candidates, again, Shia candidates running against Hezbollah and Amal in Baalbek, forcing them eventually to bow out. For me, that's the behavior not of a confident party, confident in their electoral prospect, but it's a behavior of a party that's not that confident, of a party that is worried about some results and the possibility of somebody breaking through that wall, and which again will go a long way, even if it's 1 or two. It will go a long way in breaking that aura, in basically creating more room for dissent and legitimizing dissent through the electoral, through the ballot box. That's very important to watch. And then finally is how many of the independent candidates will make it. A lot has been said already about their problems, whether it's threat and intimidation, their weak political machines, their inaccessibility to money, although some of them are being funded by bankers and by, big money groups, which eventually in the eyes of their voters has delegitimized them. But I understand you need money to run, to run a political machine. But also, the infighting among them. If you look at every electoral district, except maybe in the South, the change movement or the opposition party are fielding more than one list in every candidate. In every electoral district, and every list also is a combination of basically candidates who belong to groups, opposition groups, who do not see eye to eye on a number of issues. So, for example, you are seeing, for example, I'll give you an example. In Beirut too, the electoral district, there is this change list that people might be voting for, but then there is one candidate on that list who is backed by Nabih Berri, although he is seen as part of the opposition, but he's being backed by Nabih Berri. And people are saying, well, we might find, we want to vote for that list, but we are not going to give him our preferential vote. So this is a kind of confusing political scene that voters are encountering, in terms of looking at the opposition list. And so if we can get 10 to 12 opposition candidates, win, I think that's a major improvement on 2018 when we had one. And that can create a momentum, or a catalyst for some kind of change, of a movement for change that can work within the parliament, going forward. So I will stop at this point.
Well, quick question, Randa. Do you expect that Hezbollah and its various allies will come out with a majority? And if so, what might it look like? Or are they at risk of losing their current majority?
Let me build on what Philippe said in terms of the anger. And I think, as I said, they are not as confident as they used to be in 2018 and you have seen, their Secretary General Nasrallah give now, one speech after the other. Today, I think he's not giving one, but after the day after tomorrow, when it is the vote for the poll workers, I think he's going to give again another vote. And again, he's using, the typical discourse of the old discourse of this is a vote against the resistance. This is a vote for Israel. And it's interesting that in his last speech, he is he is reusing again the discourse of the Islamic resistance, which before it was the Lebanese resistance. Now it's the Islamic resistance. And I think this has something to do with appealing to some of those Sunni voters who are disenchanted maybe with the traditional Sunni political elites. It's hard to tell. I think that, as I said, the way they are behaving does not give me, an indication that they are super confident they're going to maintain their majority. And if they don't maintain that majority, especially because of the loss that FPM is going to have, and depending on the size of that loss, what's going to be their behavior? For me, that does not spell good for the formation of the cabinet. So, and then eventually maybe for holding the presidential elections on time. So because there is a lot of unpredictability in this vote, all the way from the boycott to the anger to the diffusion of the opposition voters, of the opposition vote, basically among all these competing lists, it puts me in a position of not really being able to predict. I think there is definitely the scenario of them maintaining this majority, and there is definitely equally possible the scenario of losing that majority by few votes. So the loss, if they lose, is not going to be a large share of, I mean, it's not going to be many seats. It's going to be maybe 4 to 5, maybe 6 seats.
Thank you, Randa. Thank you, Randa. And I must say, I mean, I guess we should be very grateful that Lebanon still has elections. Maybe one of only 2 countries in the Arab world that really still have, they're not perfect elections by any means, but still, I think only 2 countries where things are actually decided during an election. All the more reason for everybody to keep voting and keep doing our best despite the difficulties. We have 10 more minutes left, and I do want to, a quick round with all 3 of you. So try to, I guess, keep your remarks telegraphic, as they say. Philippe, let me turn to you. Tell us a bit how your NDI, I mean, you did already, but any sort of last words about how NDI is preparing for and seeing these elections and what you plan to do after the election? Is it issue a report, press conference? How do you follow up? So Philippe, over to you.
Yeah, great question, Paul. Well, I'll share with everybody in the chat here our pre-election election assessment that we put out a few weeks ago, following sort of extensive work here in both assessing the conduct of the elections, or the systems that are being put in place to safeguard the election integrity. And there's a whole bunch of recommendations that I want folks to have a look at for the post-election period and future elections. And so I'll talk a little bit about that very briefly and simply say that I think we should, as Paul just mentioned, commend the fact that Lebanon is one of maybe one other country, 2 countries that are actually holding elections in the region. And given the backdrop to which they're being held, I think that in of itself is commendable, assuming everything goes well. And that's a big assumption, but we'll fingers crossed. I will also say that I think from our perspective, we're mostly concerned with, again, accessibility on election day. We want to make sure that that there's no real overt intimidation, as we've seen a few small instances already take place in Lebanon. I think that will sort of determine how successful of an election actually is conducted in Lebanon going forward. And I think the final point I'll say is that the international community must really continue to pay attention to Lebanon after the election period. It's a big year of change for the country. I think there's a lot at stake in terms of IMF funding and World Bank funding to help resuscitate the Lebanese economy, or rebuild it rather. I think that these elections are going to be very sort of definitive as to what direction the country is going to be headed to. And I think that that's going to require a lot of buy-in from the international community. I think the United States is going to continue to look at civil society in Lebanon that have been doing tremendous work on the ground here around election integrity, around a political party capacity, and building these political parties out so they're more functional and more progressive, and they include more women, and they protect minority rights in the country, and all the sorts of things we want to see in a healthy democracy. These are all of the indicators that we're going to be looking at after election day and going forward.
Thank you, Philippe. And I do want to thank everything that NDI does. It's a very, very critical institution. And to say that this, fight for democracy, to still have the right and the capacity to vote. And as we've mentioned, there's 2 countries left in the Arab world where that still is a possibility. There is a war in Europe now, partly about, do people have the right to determine their future, or does might make right? And if you can just bomb people to submission. So this is a really important struggle. And I'm very proud that Lebanon is still at the forefront at that struggle, despite all of its challenges. So also sort of kudos to the Lebanese people who are still, doing their very best there. Rony, I know there's a big team. You've already mentioned a lot of how you're preparing for the elections. Let me first ask you maybe what might seem like an irrelevant question, which is what happened to the local elections? There were supposed to be municipal elections this year as well. It's important to note that it's tough to get into parliament. There's only 128 seats, but hopefully some will get in. But there's tens of thousands of seats available, as it were, in the municipalities. What's happened to those elections quickly, because we are running out of time? To you, Rony.
Unfortunately, Paul, it was postponed. I mean, in just one parliamentary session, they have postponed the elections 1 year. So it's supposed to be done next May. So yeah, that's what happened to the municipality elections.
Okay, let's make sure that LADE and others, after we get through this, that is a major, major democratic struggle. We must make sure that they happen in May of 2019. Rony, any final words before I turn to Nanda? Any final words about the upcoming elections on Sunday? Anything you'd like to share?
No, we are just having this like 3 concerns just to share with you very briefly, very quick. First, regarding the head of polling station, they were not really very well trained. I have mentioned this before. Second, we might see kind of a protest or the number of teachers, the contract teachers, usually who are member of these polling stations, they were not really enthusiastic to be part of this commission. Like around 1,500 contract teachers may not join, as they mentioned, because they are waiting for the payment for their transportation allowance and social grants. The same kind of for the judges who are the members of the primary and higher registration committee. They are seeing that the allowance is not really suitable to their job. And one more thing is that the issue of the electricity, the Ministry of Interior has asked the municipalities to see and to try with the generators, private generators, to power the voting centers. And we all know that a lot of owners of these generators belong to some of the political parties. So we are having concern that at any moment that the counting process is not really maybe in favor of these political parties, the electricity might go off. It's a concern. We are not sure that this will happen definitely, but it's just a concern. Otherwise, as LADE, we are present. We are in most of the polling stations, and we are doing our best to report on any big and major violations.
Thank you, Rony. And again, thank you for everything LADE is doing there. Renda, let me conclude with you on another political note. You and I are in the United States. US is a major foreign policy player in Lebanon and in the region. It has been very supportive of having these elections. What sort of messages would you give to American policymakers? 3 or 4 things as we look to this election process in Lebanon. What would your statements, recommendations be to US lawmakers and US policymakers?
First recommendation, look at this election, look at the enthusiasm of the Lebanese in the expatriate communities, especially in the United States, which has a large number of Lebanese American voters. Look at how organizations like LADE and like NDI are, organizing this. How many Lebanese in LADE and other organizations are really, putting their lives here and investing their time in making sure that this election process, this democracy can survive despite all the challenges. So this is a country and this is a people that deserve our support. Now, do not focus too much on the results of the election. Do not say, oh, if only 8 or 7 opposition candidates win, oh, it's not enough, let's give up on it. Let's look at so the numbers of who wins in terms of the opposition should not be the benchmark to basically use in deciding whether we should continue supporting Lebanon or not. The values that drive this country and Lebanon, and the values that drive the Lebanese are values that we share as Americans. And this is the kind of investment we need to put in the short term, medium term, long term. What Lebanon requires from the US is a long game approach and not a short term approach. Because in the short term, again, the elections, hopefully it will produce more change candidates, but also it might not. But in the long term, these values that these elections are trying to push for and enshrine and reflect are there to stay, and change will come. The question is, are we as a country here in the United States willing to adopt this long-term approach to Lebanon and accompany the Lebanese in this journey, which eventually will lead to the kind of Lebanon that all Lebanese aspire to and want.
Randa very eloquently and movingly said, I could not agree more. Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our session. Let me first thank our panelists, Randa Slim, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute and Director of the Conflict Resolution and Diplomacy Program. Let me see if I have that exactly right. Conflict Resolution and Track 2 Dialogues Program. Randa, thank you for that. And thank you, Philippe Nasif, who's the Program Director for the Middle East and North Africa of the National Democratic Institute, currently in Beirut. And thank you, Rony Al Assaad, Secretary General of the Lebanese Association for Democratic Elections, LADE. And through us, Rony, please thank and salute all of your LADE members and observers around the country and around the world. Thank you, our audience, for being with us on Zoom and on YouTube. And good luck for the elections tomorrow, Thursday, and most importantly, Sunday. We look forward to gathering again after the elections. Let me mention that MEI is hosting a post-election debrief on Tuesday, May 17 at 10 a.m. Eastern time in the US, at least, so that would be 5 p.m. in Beirut, with a number of experts from Beirut and Washington to assess the aftermath. Thank you all, and good luck. Bye-bye.